Hello and welcome to It's Never Too Late, the podcast where we explore the inspiring journeys of women who have embraced change, achieved remarkable things and followed their dreams in midlife and beyond. I'm Claire Roberts-Molloy, midlife mindset coach, and in each episode, I'm speaking to women who prove that age is just a number and it's never too late to chase your dreams and achieve your goals. And today I'm joined by the rather wonderful Marlene Wagman-Geller, who is a prolific author and is best known for her engaging biographies of remarkable women throughout history. She's a lifelong bibliophile and received her BA from York University and teaching credentials from the University of Toronto and San Diego State University. She has written more than 12 books now, which I think is frankly amazing, including Women of Means, Fabulous Female First, and Behind Every Great Man. She's garnered praise from publications like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and her work often focuses on uncovering the untold stories of influential women, from royals and heiresses to trailblazers and rebels. And we all love those rebels, don't we? She currently resides in California and balances her writing career with her very new retirement, which I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit more about and what she's getting up to while she's enjoying her retirement. So, Marlene, welcome. I'm really pleased to have you join us on the podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, one of the reasons I was so keen to have you as a guest on the It's Never Too Late podcast is because you have recently, fairly recently, written a book which just completely encapsulates the whole essence of this podcast. And that book is called Great Second Acts. So can you introduce our listeners a little bit to that book, how it came about and some of the things you've discovered?
Certainly. Well, one of the pertinent questions that people ask when they first find out you wrote a book is, how did you get the idea? And I wrote this a couple of years ago. And on Facebook, I stay in friends with I'm from Toronto, Canada originally, and I stay in contact with some people through Facebook. And I remember one of the women, she was my contemporary, and she said, "Oh, I just can't believe it. I'm having another birthday. I'm turning." And I think it was 50 at that time. And she was saying, "I just can't believe it." And then I just thought, where did it come about? When we're little, our birthdays are such a big time. It's a celebration. We're the center of attention. We look so forward to our birthday. What happens? Then all of a sudden, a negative magic wand comes. And all of a sudden, like Lily said, it's something to be avoided and dreaded. And I said, we have to change our paradigm about aging. It's like, we even have the saying, the old gray mare, she ain't what she used to be. Why do we have to have such negative rhymes? Why, when we think of older woman, we have the vision of an old woman on a rocking chair with a knitting needle. And then I thought I should write a book that showcases women in history from various walks of life, that shows what you had mentioned earlier, that women are more than the age on their birth certificate. And so I called it Great Second Acts. It's a quotation to F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he had written, "There are no great second acts in American life." Well, for him, it wasn't, because after he wrote his opus magnus, The Great Gatsby, he just became a hopeless alcoholic and one of the literary geniuses of American letters. He couldn't even hold a pen. His hand was shaking so much. So for him, there was no great second acts. But the woman that I showcased in my book, the subtitle is In Praise of Older Women. So I showcase these women that says the best is yet to be. There's a Robert Browning poem I just remembered, "The best is yet to be the first of life, which was the last was made." So in the book, it's these really inspiring women who just came into their own in their second acts.
Yeah. And that's so important, isn't it? And I've not heard that phrase before, the old grey mare. I think that
Oh,
may
yeah.
be quite an Americanism or maybe from
Maybe
Canada.
it's in America. It was, yeah, the old gray
Yeah.
mare. She ain't what she used to be. And no, or, the Eskimos, the North American Eskimos with their age, they would put them in, because they called them useless feeders, and they would put the elderly on a knife's flow and send them off. And that's a completely different paradigm with the Chinese, who venerate their
Mm,
they're elderly. And here in North America, it's proliferation of old folks' homes, retirement homes, nursing homes. While in Chinese culture, the elder is the
mm.
honored one, and they have a place of, a place of pride at the
Yeah.
table.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons I wrote the book and say, no, it's, and for myself, I found that the second part of life is the most exciting, because when you're younger, you have to have school and do what your parents say. When you're middle aged, you're sort of in the bookend, looking after elderly parents and looking after your young kids and making career. Phew. So it's only when you finally retire and the kids are grown that you finally do have the most precious of all commodities is free time. And so that is a wonderful time of life, and not something that should be looked at as, you're in the cobwebs. You're in
Mm,
the
mm.
cobweb years. It really should truly be the golden years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more and more women are embracing it now, aren't they? They are seeing it as an exciting time.
Yeah.
Quite often, as you say, kids are grown up, you've probably become slightly more established, and you have got more freedom and time to go and pursue some of those things that maybe you've put on that back burner from when you were younger.
Because it's finally the time to do what you want to do as opposed to what you have to do. Like, all my life, I was a high school English teacher, history English teacher, and I liked my career. But what I really wanted to do was write. So now I'm finally, and it was always very challenging because I had
Mm.
to juggle, writing, being a homemaker, and my career. And it was really, truly a juggling act.
Yeah, yeah.
But something, there is, where there is, it is the power of persistence. If you
Mm.
want to make it happen enough, you keep your eye on the prize, and it does happen. And at least, at the end of your life, if you gave it your damnedest, you can't cast aspersions on yourself, because I said, I gave it everything I could.
Yeah. And you definitely have. I mean, you've written 13 books, and I'm sure you're not finished yet. We'll find out towards the end, sort of what your next projects are. But I'm really fascinated to learn more about the women that you did cover in Great Second Acts. So can you share some of those women and some of those stories with our listeners?
Oh, sure. Well, one of them, of course, that everybody knows is Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Mm.
And I mean, here she is. She's 88. And she said, because you're supposed to be a Supreme Court justice for life. And she took it literally. And she said, I'm not retiring. And wanted to make a chapter of the book, you had to meet certain criterias. One, you had to accomplish great things and I tried to make it like extreme age. So she was 88 and she was still going to the Supreme Court, making decisions that affected the nation. And she was working out in their gym. Like, okay, right. Yeah, right. But also the women had to have fascinating lives, because if they didn't, there was no chapter. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a remarkable woman, because she was starting into her career in the 1950s, and she was laboring under many, many obstacles. First of all, she wanted to be a lawyer, and there was very few women lawyers in the 1950s. So she had to labor against being a woman. She was Jewish, and it was, a great deal of anti-Semitism. It was just post-World War II. So she was fighting anti-Semitism. She was fighting, the gender barrier. But she just said, I'm going to do it. And one of the things that did help her, her husband was a very, very supportive, and he was a great cook, and he would cook the dinners, and he supported her through her career. And so she was, very tenacious, a lot of integrity, and she just absolutely did not let the age factor into her equation.
And she was fiercely intelligent, wasn't she? I mean,
Yes,
she was she had an amazing mind. She's one of my heroes. She is.
exactly. And
Yeah.
what you just said is really important because I think, like, especially when my mom was growing up, like, it was embarrassing to work outside the home because it was an embarrassment to my father that, oh, what, I'm not earning enough money. And for some women who are made to be housewives and mothers, that's a great role. But you take somebody like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, all her intelligence and her ambition and her knowledge of jurisprudence law, and then you just regulate her to going to PTA meetings. How frustrated she would be.
Mm.
So I think women have done, you say, remember the Helen Reddy song, I'm still an embryo with a long, long way to go. But nevertheless, women have made huge strides since the 1950s. And, I've experienced the different paradigm changes, and it is going in the right direction in terms of, gender equality. And I think the woman profiled in my book for making it so. They were that we were the pygmies standing on the giants.
Yeah, yeah. And for any of our listeners who haven't watched, well, one, they should go out and buy your book, shouldn't they, and read and read more about these women there. But also, there was a film made about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life on the basis of sex, which is a great film, which I'd recommend as well if you do want to know more about that amazing woman. But what were some of the other women that you covered then? Because it sounds like it was a really tough call to make it into a chapter. There had to be some pretty special women.
Well, there was one, and I don't know how she slipped through the pages of time. But she was an American woman, and at 65, she had never married or had children, so her career was everything to her. And age 65 in the 1950s was a mandatory retirement age of 65, and so she said, "I'm dedicating my life to getting rid of that ageism." That law, which was predicated on ageism, and she started an organization instead of the Black Panthers. She started an organization called the Gay Panthers, and she was so hysterical. And she fought against, and through her efforts, she reached President Ronald Reagan. And the irony is, the average person has to, when Ronald Reagan was in office, she reached him and she said, it's wrong to have a 65 retirement age in the United States. And he passed the law, getting rid of that law. And she was very interesting, and she was such a character too. And I just loved her. She would dress in purple and high go-go boots, and she was in her 80s, and she'd be at the games, and she'd be, she was just such an amazing, and that.
Name? What was her name, Marlene?
Margaret Kahn, Kahn. Let me just double check that, because I did write it many, many years ago. But yes, her name was Margaret Kuhn, and she started the Gay Panthers. And she was a very important woman because she really did, because, there's many types of discrimination through the prism of discrimination. There's many different faucets. And she said, no, you can't make us retire if we're still vital and we're smart. Why do you reach the magic age of 65 and you give us a watch? Screw your watch. Let me keep working. So it was too late for her, but she said, part of the things of these women, they paved the way to others.
Yeah. And we've got to be thankful for that, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. And another one was, when I loved her story, was, she's remembered as Grandma Moses, and she was the great American. She painted folk paintings. She did folk paintings, and she only came into her own when she was in her 80s, and she started painting, and her first painting, she took it to the general store, and she used to make homemade jam, and she'd put her homemade jam and she'd put her painting, and nobody wanted it. And now they're museum pieces that sell hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there's millions of dollars on merchandising because she's on Christmas cards and her scenes on wrapping paper. She's an industry. So, she was another real character. And she said, I can't believe people are beating a path to my door. She was really interesting as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I've read about Grandma Moses, and um, I think society's too quick just to rule people out, aren't they? They're just to say, well, what can you offer? I know in my own life, I know some amazing women who are past the age of 65 and into their 80s. And in the past, people have said, well, why do you sort of hang around with these older women? Because society writes them off. I'm like, because they've lived the most interesting lives.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's like, I think the worst type of thing is to be invisible. Like I once worked at the school for abused children and they were taken out of their homes. And then when I remember kids said to me, I wouldn't care if my dad beat me, but the worst thing my dad was he ignored me. I was just invisible. And I think with older women, sometimes because they don't have maybe, the beauty of their youth. So they become invisible. And that's the worst insult you can make somebody is Casper. They become like a ghost-like presence. And I think, and I belong to some Facebook groups, and one is called, I think, women over 60 or something. I can't remember the name exactly. And women always say, oh, look, and they always post pictures of them with their plastic surgery and this. And then one day, and the other day, this woman posted and said, I'm fighting it every step of the way. I could dye my hair. I do this. And I said, and I said, one of the greatest things that age has brought me is that I don't suffer under the weight of other people's opinion. And I realized that true beauty is internal, not external. And all that effort that I spent all my life, doing all these beauty trends. I could have been a brain surgeon. I could have, done so much, but I was pigeonholed into believing, I'm not more than my physicality, which is much more than men, because men are still judged on their money and their business, and the women are still judged on their looks. But I think that's another thing that has to go the way of the dodo, because, the inner worth and of the woman is so much more. I was trying to say to that lady, yeah, of course, care how you look, but you don't need the artificial eyelashes and all that stuff. Like, why? You are what you are, and you're so much more than the visual.
Yeah. And I think it's important, isn't it? Because we want to feel good about ourselves, but I think it's when you're doing it for yourself, or when you're doing it because that's how you think you should be presenting yourself. And I think that's the difference.
Exactly. Like, sure, of course, I'm not. Yeah, of course, look the best that you can. But, something is, it's what's more important if I had to, between worrying about, because, sometimes looking good at a certain age is a full-time job. And I'd much rather have a worthwhile full-time job, like my writing or volunteering at my cat shelter more than going for getting fake eyelashes and fake nails. But, it's, and I was really inspired by the woman. Like, well, even read one other woman I found was so remarkable. She, her name is Beatrice Wood, and she lives in Ojai, California. And she's a ceramist. And I don't know that a lot of people are aware of this, but James Cameron, who directed the Titanic, he admitted he used Beatrice Wood as the model for the aged Rose in Titanic. And as a matter of fact, if you rewatch the Titanic, at the beginning, the older Rose is at a ceramic studio, and then her daughter turns on the TV. That was Beatrice Wood, because she was that's what she does. She makes ceramics. And so, and then he said, would you care to play the role of Rose? And she said, no, my hearing isn't so good. I wouldn't be able to. And when he made the movie, he went to her home, which is a beautiful home museum in Ojai, California. And he gave her at that time it was a DVD. And she said, I know how it ends and it's too sad. And and then she passed away at 105. Wow. And we said, what's your secret to longevity? And she said, rich chocolate and young men. Like, she was hysterical. She was hysterical. And like I said, right now, the Beatrice Wood Center for the Arts is, if you go there, it's a museum in a very beautiful enclave of California. We have to go on a road trip, Claire. And
Yeah, I'd love that.
road trip. And then you see a lot of her ceramics are there. The house is just like she left it because she never had children and she left it to California. And so if you go there, you see the Ojai Mountain is in the distance and you see her art-filled home. And it's just, and she was just truly inspiring. And up till 105, she was still doing her ceramics and she was a real character. She was wearing like long, she had gone to India and she was wearing the long dresses and she wore bangles like arms and she had her hair in a braid to her hips. So I like the characters. I like the characters.
Yeah, it sounds like you do. Did your research, because I think all of the women, I was going to say characters, they're actual women, were they all in America, or did you find any from other countries?
I think I try not to be just too American centric. So so I did Tao Portian Lynch. She was European, and she took up yoga, and she was doing yoga till she was 103 and riding like a maniac. Like everybody, she had a red little Volkswagen. Everybody in her town she did move to America, but she was European, and she was the world's oldest yoga teacher. So she was, so that was her name. I can't pronounce it. It was Tao Portian Lynch. And so she wasn't. And let me see what else. And then Helen Bamber, she was European. Simone Weil, she was French. So because I didn't want it to be, like I said, just to be too much. Just American. So even though the bulk was American, I did do people like Rita Moreno. She was Puerto Rican, and I thought she won 5 awards. Like she won the Academy Award. She won so many awards. And when she just received a lifetime achievement, she killed me because she wore the dress in her late 80s that she had worn when she accepted the Academy Award when she was 18 for her role in West Side Story. And she still looked amazing in the dress.
Oh my, I can't even imagine being able to fit into the clothes when I was 18.
Yeah, I know. I go, yeah. So she was still, radiant, and she's accomplished so much, and she's been through a lot, including a devastating affair with Marlon Brando, who rejected her. But I think one of these women, like life kicked them in the teeth. But I think the common denominator of all these women was they just kept on going. Okay, life, you've done your worst, but hey, I'm still here. I'm still here.
Yeah, and they let go of. They just, as you said, they stopped caring about society's opinions of them, and they wanted, and they carried on doing what they wanted to do, and if something was in their way, like a law on retirement, they changed it.
Right. And I think another commonality is they said the societal opinion doesn't matter as much as the opinion that stares me in the mirror. And they might say, that's not how older women act, but they go, there's no fast and true. And then at the end of the book, I put a poem. Did you ever hear the poem? It says, when I'm an old woman, I shall wear purple.
Yes. Yeah.
So at the end, she says, when I was young, I was just this goody two shoes. But now I realized, I want to wear what I want and do what I want because this is my time. I've spent my whole life in the service of others as a woman. We're nurturers. We looked after the children. We looked after our husbands. We did our careers. We looked after our parents. And now at this great second act, it's okay. It's finally my time. And of course, life is still going to intrude with its octopus hands. But as much as we can, this is our time. We earned it. We deserve it.
Yeah. And I think what sort of fascinated me with the women that you cover within Great Second Acts is that some of them I've definitely heard of. So I've heard of Grandma Moses. I've obviously heard of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And there's others that are familiar, but there's so many who aren't. And why do you think generally these women's stories aren't told?
Well, Why are they not told? Well, I think a lot of times, men still garner the spotlight of history. So sometimes, and I did want to balance between the famous and the not so famous, like I did, Madeleine Albright, because I mean, imagine being, she started out a Czechoslovakian. She came to America and she becomes, the first Secretary of State. And she said, but she still had to look after the kids and the grocery list. And what was interesting in the chapter, though, even though she's this big, powerful woman and she's dealing with Gaddafi and she's dealing with all world leaders, she still was absolutely devastated by her husband who left her for a younger woman. And she took such abuse from him. He said, well, if I get to be, I think it was a senator, I'll stay with you because it'd be bad for my reputation to leave my life. And she was pleading and begging, don't leave me. So I mean, so in one way, she was so educated and she could, really, she was really tough as nails, but in her own personal life, she was still like the 50s woman, please don't leave me. I'll do anything. So, but then at the end, when he did leave her she just said, okay, that's great. I have politics. I have myself. I have some core.
Brilliant.
I think one thing, though, I think a message that the book has to impart, though, is women have to, in your life, you have to think about retirement because it ultimately does come. And if people make their children their whole world, or if they make their career the whole world, ultimately the children grow up. Ultimately, we do have to leave our careers. And, it can be a great second act if we have something to make it so. So in the back of our mind, we have to say, like if Madeleine Albright, she had 4 daughters, but she still went to university and got her doctorate. But had she not done those things, and had she just been a housewife and their husband leaves her, the children grow up, then she would have had nothing. But she always went and she always kept her finger in politics. So therefore, she, that's an important lesson. It can only be a great second act if we take preemptive steps to make it a great second act.
Yeah. And you do see, don't you, because it's tough to try and balance everything. So if you are raising family, if you are working, if you are trying to keep a home, it's a lot of pressure. And so I think along the way, what gets left behind or put to the side because of the time, because you're, exhausted by life, especially when kids are young, is all of those dreams and all of those ambitions. And that is what gets left aside. And, I think what these women demonstrate is that they've always kept that little bit for themselves.
Absolutely, because it's because they never fell prey to the empty nest syndrome, which so many women do. Because I'm super mom, the school lunches will be perfect, and the Halloween costume will be perfect, and so you're super mom. But then ultimately, the kids grow up, and then what do? You lost your role, and there's no other. But I think sort of the women who were, proactive, they said, okay, in the back of my mind, the kids are going to grow up and I have to do something else. And maybe the kids' lunches won't be as perfect, or you won't attend as many PTA meetings, but that's okay too. Because, otherwise, then there's nothing, then you do become sitting on the porch with the knitting needles.
And some people love knitting. There's a mass revival of knitting in the UK.
Yeah, no.
I'm not one of them, but yeah.
Yeah, right. But just a metaphor, the old thing of the woman in the rocking chair.
Yeah.
It's like, and it could be anything, because knitting is like the thing is, anything is wonderful. If you have, being a grandma is wonderful, or knitting wonderful things, as long as there's something that you have for yourself that makes you want to wake up and makes you want to still feel vital.
Brilliant. That's a great piece of advice sort of to end on. But out of all the women that you cover in Great Second Acts, did you have a favourite?
Good mother loves all her children, right? But if I had to say one that I liked the most is, let's see, Edith Windsor. She was a remarkable woman. Edith Windsor was remarkable, and she loved this woman very, very much. But back then, America did not have same sex marriage. And when she was in her late 60s, her partner had a terrible, terrible disease, and they wanted to get married legally. Canada was allowing same-sex marriages. So she arranged, and she was arranged to charter a private plane. Her girlfriend was in a stretcher. They flew all the way to Canada. They found a rabbi to officiate at the ceremony. And then Edith Windsor, in her 80s, she was petitioning Congress to accept same-sex marriage. And when they passed that law, Edith Windsor, she was in front of the Capitol building, and she was wearing her scarf, and she was going like this, and she was dancing, and she was in her 80s, and she was just so amazing. And then they traveled as long as they could. Her and her partner just loved traveling, and they were living at a time where it was like the love that dare not speak its name. It was like totally taboo, but she didn't let society condemnation. She didn't let her age dim her luster for life. And that's a beautiful story of Edith Windsor and her girlfriend. It was just a beautiful, beautiful story. And I don't know if she's well known. Like, are you familiar with Edith Windsor?
No, I've not heard of her. No.
Oh, yeah. And so I thought, she's not known, but what an icon, what a wonderful, wonderful woman. So yeah, they're all just an amalgam of wonderful, but in many different ways. So I just thought, and every time I wrote it, it was always, each chapter was a labor of love, because each woman had to have an interesting story. They had to be inspiring, and they had to have done great. They had to do great accomplishments in the twilight years of their lives.
Brilliant. And I think so many women do all those things, but they don't talk about it, or they don't get acknowledged for it. So thank you for bringing all their stories to us, Marlene. It's been so wonderful to chat to you. So if there is a listener out there who is perhaps facing retirement, what would be your one piece of advice to them?
A listener there's no expiration date on one's dreams. And wherever you are in your life, find your passion. And once you find your passion, put on the blinkers and travel to it, and don't let anybody, and don't care about the weight of other people's opinions. You've done that perhaps for years. This is your time.
Thank you so much, Marlene. It's been absolutely fascinating speaking to you today. So to our listeners, I hope today's conversation has reminded you that no matter where you are in life, it's never too late to follow your passion and achieve your goals. And if there's one thing you do before you next time, go out and buy Marlene's book, Great Second Acts. So thank you, everybody, and goodbye.